The sky was still undecided between night and morning when Hoda spoke the words that would echo longer than he intended. "Get water from the well and leave by dawn." His voice was steady, practiced like the click of a rifle being cleaned, but the land around them seemed to flinch. Pale light rested on the dry grass, and the wind carried the smell of iron and sage. Hoda stood straight, broad-shouldered, his coat clean, his boots expensive, a man shaped by success and solitude. Aylin faced him with a bucket in her hands, her dark hair braided simply, her dress faded by too many washings. She did not look surprised, only tired in a way that suggested she had heard versions of this sentence all her life, and as the words settled between them like dust, something unspoken waited to be disturbed. Aylin nodded once, not because she agreed, but because survival had taught her when silence was safer than questions. At 22 she had already buried a husband, buried hope with him, and learned how quickly the world decided what a native widow deserved. She walked toward the well, her bare steps quiet against the packed earth, while Hoda watched her go without moving. The bucket bumped gently against her leg, a small sound swallowed by the open land. She did not ask why dawn mattered so much to him, nor why his eyes looked away when he spoke, and the absence of her voice left a hollow space neither of them dared to fill. The well stood a short distance from the cabin, its wooden frame worn smooth by years of hands that had pulled life from the ground. Aylin wrapped the rope around her palm, feeling the rough fibers bite gently into her skin, a familiar pain that reminded her she was still here. As she lowered the bucket, she sensed Hoda behind her, not close enough to touch, not far enough to pretend indifference. He had fixed the pulley the night before, tightening bolts, oiling the wheel, saying nothing as she watched from the doorway. That was how he cared, through quiet repairs, through distance that pretended to be order. And the water rose slowly, reflecting a pale strip of sky that promised change. Hoda told himself he was doing the right thing, that a man like him could not afford rumors curling around his name like smoke. He owned land, cattle, influence, and the town already watched him with a mixture of respect and envy. Bringing a native widow into his life would invite judgment, and judgment could become loss. He had learned early that wanting something did not mean you were allowed to keep it. Standing there, he clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of his own command press against his chest, wondering when protection had begun to feel so much like rejection. Aylin lifted the full bucket, her arms steady despite the strain, and turned toward the cabin. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a crossing of looks heavy with things neither had named. She carried the water inside and set it carefully by the door, as if placing an offering rather than completing a task. For a heartbeat, she considered speaking, telling him that dawn would come whether he wished it or not, that leaving had become second nature to her. Instead, she smoothed her dress and stepped back outside, the morning air cool against her skin, carrying with it the faint ache of something almost shared. The town had made its opinion clear long before Hoda spoke his command. Aylin felt it in the way eyes slid past her, in the whispers that followed her footsteps like shadows. A widow was expected to disappear, especially one without the protection of a powerful family. Hoda knew this too, and it was this knowledge that knotted his silence. He had grown up learning the rules of belonging, how a man earned his place by keeping order, by not inviting unnecessary storms. Yet watching Aylin stand alone in the growing light, he wondered when obedience to those rules had begun to feel like a betrayal of himself. As night crept back in for the last time before her leaving, Aylin folded the few things she owned with care. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if honoring the life she was about to walk away from. The cabin was quiet, the walls holding the warmth of the fire and the echoes of days spent in shared but unspoken companionship. Hoda sat at the table, hands resting flat on the wood, every muscle tense with words he refused to release. The space between them felt charged as though one breath could tip everything into chaos. Dawn arrived softly, indifferent to human hesitation. Aylin stepped outside, her bundle light on her shoulder, the horizon painted in muted gold. She paused by the well, fingers brushing the wood, grounding herself in something solid before turning away. Behind her, the cabin door opened, and Hoda stood there, the morning light stripping him of shadows and excuses. He did not call her name, not yet, and the moment stretched thin, trembling with the possibility of either ending or beginning, waiting for someone to be brave enough to choose. Hoda watched her walk away and understood, with a clarity that felt almost cruel, that some moments do not return if they are allowed to pass untouched. Aylin's figure moved steadily across the pale earth, her steps neither hurried nor hesitant, as if she had already accepted whatever the day intended to give her. The morning light gathered around her shoulders, soft and honest, and for the first time he saw her not as a problem to be managed but as a life choosing itself. In that instant all the careful distances he had built collapsed inward, leaving him exposed to a truth he had delayed too long. He stepped forward, then stopped, the old weight settling back onto him like a familiar coat. The town would talk. The town always did. He had spent years shaping his life to withstand those voices, convincing himself that solitude was a fair price for respect. Yet watching Aelin continue on, he felt how hollow that bargain had been. Respect without warmth had turned his home into a well-kept emptiness, and silence had not protected him so much as preserved his fear. The thought followed him like a quiet question. What kind of man survives everything except his own heart? Aelin, he said at last. The name left his mouth unguarded, stripped of command or authority. She stopped, though she did not turn. The pause itself was an answer, a small mercy she offered without knowing whether he deserved it. Aelin had learned that stopping was sometimes the most generous thing a person could do. She had been summoned before by voices that wanted obedience, comfort, or forgiveness, and she had given all three until she had nothing left. This time, she waited to see whether the sound behind her carried anything different. The wind moved through the grass between them, patient, as if it too was listening. Hoda crossed the remaining distance until they stood near the well, the place where words had so often failed them. I told you to leave, he said, not as a reminder but as a confession. Not because I wanted you gone, but because I was afraid of what it would mean to ask you to stay. Aelin turned then, her expression calm but guarded. There was no anger in her eyes, only a fatigue that came from having carried grief and dignity side by side for too long. Fear has always found me, she replied quietly. It finds women like me easily. The question is whether I am expected to live inside it with you. His throat tightened. He had practiced explanations in his mind, about reputation, about land, about how the world worked, but none of them belonged in this moment. They sounded small now, unworthy of the space she occupied. I don't want you hidden, he said. I don't want you leaving before dawn, or living in the cracks of my life. I want you in the open even if it costs me. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Aelin studied his face, searching for the familiar signs of pity or possession. Instead she found uncertainty and beneath it resolve. She set her bundle down by her feet, as if allowing herself to stand unburdened for the first time in days. I won't stay to be rescued, she said. I won't stay to be forgiven. If I stay, it will be because I am chosen without shame. Hoda nodded, the motion slow and deliberate. Then stay only if you choose me the same way, he answered. Not because you need shelter but because you want a life that stands upright. The well creaked softly as a breeze turned its pulley, the sound threading through the silence like a reminder of how easily things could be broken or mended. Aelin closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the dry, familiar scent of the land. She thought of the road ahead, of the long habit of leaving before she was asked, of how tired she was of carrying her worth on her back. When she opened her eyes again, there was something new in them, not hope exactly, but permission. I will stay, she said. But I will not become smaller to make it easier. You won't have to, Hoda replied, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. The town saw them together later that morning, walking side by side without hurry or explanation. Some faces hardened, some softened, and many simply watched, unsure of how to place what they were seeing. Hoda felt the familiar scrutiny press against him, but it no longer shaped his steps. Aelin walked with her chin lifted, not defiant, just present, as if her belonging required no defense. Their closeness was quiet, intentional, and that quiet unsettled more than any display might have. They did not marry quickly nor loudly. When it happened, it was under open sky, witnessed by a handful of people who mattered and many who did not. There was no attempt to dress the moment in spectacle. Instead, there was intention. Hands joined without ownership, vows spoken without fear. Aelin wore her heritage without apology, and Hoda stood beside her not as a protector but as a partner. The well stood nearby, a silent marker of how far a single morning could reach. Life after did not unfold like a story told for applause. It arrived in small, steady ways. Mornings filled with shared work, evenings softened by shared silence. Hoda learned how much strength lived in listening, how often Aelin's presence corrected him without words. Aelin learned that rest could exist without vigilance, that joy did not always demand repayment. They did not erase each other's pasts. They made room for them, letting history breathe instead of burying it. There were still whispers in town, still looks that lingered too long, but they lost their power with time. Respect, Hoda discovered, grew deeper when it was no longer demanded. Aelin's laughter, rare but genuine, became part of the landscape, as ordinary and essential as water drawn from the ground. Together they built a life that did not rush to prove itself, content to be known fully by the two people living it. If you have ever stood at the edge of a choice and felt the weight of every voice except your own, remember this moment by the well. Remember that dignity is not granted by silence, and love is not preserved by fear. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is speak before dawn, and sometimes the truest belonging begins when you refuse to leave quietly.